Here we are at Volume 10 of Tales of True Crimes and Strange Weapons. Our final video in the series, at least for now. And why are we looking at a picture of Bob Dylan? Well, if you've seen the rest of my channel, you know he's my favorite musical artist, but it's because he's holding a guitar, and that is the improvised weapon in question this time. And that is what the final chapter in this book here, mine, is dedicated to. And this video is dedicated to Elvin and Diane, who kindly and generously backed the making of this book. Now we're looking at the great George Harrison and his guitar Lucille, which will make a lot of people think, oh, he named it kind of in the tradition of B.B. King naming his guitars Lucille. But no, he named it after Lucille Ball because of the color. Regardless, it's a pretty famous guitar. The one Dylan used in that last pick is pretty famous/infamous because it was the one he used to go electric with at the Newport Folk Festival. But no, most guitars that get used violently are not famous or wielded by famous people, although the latter absolutely happens. In fact, the last section of this chapter in my book is nothing but rock stars behaving badly with guitars. Side note, B.B. King never hit anybody with his guitar that I could find, but it was a violent incident that led to him naming his original guitar Lucille. Details of that are in the book, but anyway, let's get to it. Are guitars good weapons? Well, kind of depends. There are two major kinds, of course, acoustic and electric, which are very different in terms of construction. Acoustics, as I'm sure you know, are basically hollow, and we're talking thin pieces of wood stretched out over a large area. And a big, empty, thin wooden shell is obviously not the design you would go with if you were trying to design an effective bludgeon. Electric guitars, on the other hand, are much sturdier and also, therefore, heavier. They can also be hollow, but that's more rare than the other two kinds, which are solid and semi-hollow. Even a semi-hollow is more than heavy enough to do real damage. They can weigh in the range of 6 to 8 pounds. It might surprise you to know that even an acoustic guitar can do serious damage. One of the incidents in my book involves someone getting hit so hard with one, in just one strike, that the paramedics thought they were dead, and the victim was literally on the way to a funeral home instead of a hospital when they woke up, which must have been a hell of a surprise for the driver of the, quote, motor dead wagon, end quote. That incident occurred well over 100 years ago, hence the old-time lingo. But I'm not going to get into details, as you can tell, because it's in the book, and these videos are more supplementary with news stories. But before we get into that first bit of true crime, let's talk about how these things are used. It's not difficult to guess what the most common method of deployment is. Grab it by the neck, swing it like a baseball bat. Equally unsurprising is that attackers tend to target the head, and if they connect, the results can be serious, all the way up to death. Remember I brought up baseball bats a second ago? Well, you know, for a reason, right? All wood, top-heavy design, swing with both hands. Combatively, they also get used in the same way as the guitar, and none of us would want to get hit in the head with one, not if we could avoid it. And for good reason, but a typical baseball bat only weighs a fraction of what a typical electric guitar does. In fact, the bats tend to be about 2 pounds. And that should give us ample understanding of how dangerous it is then to be on the receiving end of a guitar swing. But to be honest, I can't help myself. We are going to start with a crime that is tangential at best, and because it involves use not of a guitar, but of a guitar case. And the case wasn't even used as a melee weapon at that. Here's a picture from the recent boxing super match that occurred, where Crawford came out with a guitar case and to mariachi music. I remember thinking that was really odd, and I should have made the connection right away, but I didn't. He was doing a nod to the movie El Mariachi, a Mexican film made in Spanish that kind of got remade in English as Desperado with Antonio Banderas. And all of this, anyway, was a bit of a trolling of Crawford's Mexican opponent, the great Canelo Alvarez, who should have retired after the fight he had before this one. If you're set to be remembered as one of the all-time greats, and then you can tell, or you and your team should be able to tell that you've lost a step, just retire. But kudos to Crawford. But now let's get to the guitar case crime I was referring to. Here's the headline: Man pulls rifle from guitar case, shoots 2 people. And that is an odd case of life imitating art. The really strange thing about the story is that it happened in West Palm Beach, Florida, which you're seeing a picture of here. Now, I've been there, and it's like the bougiest place on earth. I mean, I remember telling my sister, these people are all out of central casting. It's like it's nothing but snowbird billionaires, Bentleys and Ferraris at every other parking space. But this happened. The shooter was a 29-year-old man who was sitting on a park bench with a woman when he just pulled out the rifle and fired. He injured two people, a man and a woman, in a car, neither one of which died. This all might make you think this was some kind of planned hit, but no, the suspect had been drinking and smoking pot laced with fentanyl. He was feeling high levels of paranoia, and in his words to the police, he, quote-unquote, just lost it. And now let's jump from West Palm Beach, Florida to Portadown, Ireland. That last story was from 2021, by the way. This one is from this year. Police were called out at 1:30 p.m. on August 27th to the site of a disturbance. People heard some noise. The cops show up. They hear shouting and smashing sounds from inside a residence. Police enter, find a man who has cuts to his head, face, and hand. They also find a woman lying face down on an upended table in a pool of blood. She had a cut on her head, but also bruises on her arms and legs. The man claimed that the woman started the physical attacks with a bottle, an improvised weapon we've already done a video on in this series, by the way. What she claimed about the whole incident was that he had gone to a pharmacy to get a prescription drug that's one of those like a heroin replacement treatment, methadone or whatever, but they didn't have that, and instead he came home with a bottle of vodka. There were multiple weapons in this ugly incident, and they may have been used by both people or some of them. It's really hard to say, but it wasn't just a guitar. That was one of them. And she, we can say with certainty, was struck by the guitar. There was also a hammer, a plank of wood, the previously mentioned bottle, and a spray-on deodorant that was used as mace against her. This awesome castle ruin is apparently near Portadown, so if you're ever there, you can go out and check this out. A last note on this story, the man who struck again with multiple objects, apparently, but definitely a guitar, had previously been convicted 157 times for previous infractions. Wow. Now let's jump across the pond to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the area known as Porter Square that you're looking at here. And the chief of police was quoted as saying, "There was a pretty chaotic scene last night in the Porter Square area." He was referring to a night in late August of 2022, and the site of the disturbance was at a Halal Guys, or the Halal Guys restaurant. Boy, it's been a while since we've gotten anything from there. There's one in our neighborhood. They're good. But the one in question was not a good place to be at 9:30 in the evening of that August night, as an employee got into it with two patrons, one of whom was said to be a 40-year-old homeless man, and although he was homeless or semi-homeless or something, he did have a Fender electric guitar. A witness said, "They were kind of yelling back and forth with the guy from Halal. I guess they had just been inside, and he told them that they needed to leave. I don't know for what reason." The employee got hit in the head twice with the guitar. He's lucky to have survived, really. An additional danger, by the way, would have been hitting his head on the cement as he fell. More than one fatality has occurred because of that. Someone takes a hit, but then they're really finished off by the ground. Anyway, before he fell, before he got hit twice with that guitar, he'd also been sucker punched by the other man, the other patron. The reports don't really make the sequence of events clear as far as the fight, but from what I can tell, he got sucker punched, then pistol whipped his attacker. Yeah, so now there's a gun in play, and then the guitar man struck with his instrument. I think the employee was probably blindsided by that, having just used his pistol on the first guy. After that and the follow-up hit, he was helpless, and him having been the one that brought a gun into play, he's lucky the two guys, one of the two, didn't pick it up and use it on him. Did you know that Bruce Springsteen one time struck a man with a guitar? Hard to imagine, right? But it's true. In fact, here's a still shot from video of the incident. But yeah, no, he was just throwing it back to a tech who wasn't quite ready. The roadie/tech paid the price for not being ready for that killer guitar throw. He did get hit with it, but he was mostly okay, and Bruce Springsteen, being Bruce Springsteen, immediately ran over to check on him. And isn't a minor injury kind of worth it for that story as a roadie? Speaking of onstage accidents, Nirvana performed at the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards, And it was great, but bassist Chris Novoselic decided to end the performance by throwing his bass high up into the air and catching it. The only problem is he caught it with his head. He tripped a little bit on something, there's lots of stuff on a stage for a rock show. As he was adjusting his body to get ready for the guitar, the bass coming back down, it messed with his footing, and that's why that happened. Now let's go to Canberra, Australia. In 2015, two guys were on a road trip, and they weren't alone. There was at least one other person with them, and that was the girlfriend of one of the men. May have been others, we don't know, but what we do know is that tempers flared, as they can do on road trips, and that one man started being abusive to the girlfriend from that couple. Well, the boyfriend, of course, took exception, and that he got so angry the car stopped, and the person he was angry at, who had been insulting his girlfriend, ran from the vehicle. But he got chased down by Luke Williams, 31 years old, who had a guitar in his hand. And he caught up to his victim. Perhaps the fact that his victim was drunk was a factor in that equation. Regardless, Luke caught up and inflicted the following injuries on the other guy: a depressed skull fracture, fractured eye socket, and bleeding on the brain. Yikes. Worst of all, or the twist here, is that the man he was attacking was his twin brother. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in jail. And we will start wrapping it up from there. When I first chose this object, guitars, and wanted to write a chapter about them as weapons, I didn't know there would be so many crimes to pick from. They get used more than you would think, and they are dangerous. Thanks again to Elvin and Diane for helping me put my book out. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll see when I get back around to doing more of these. Thanks.